Hello, guys. Welcome in. Happy Monday. We're going to be drawing gestures today. Just want to make sure that you guys can hear me okay. And I can see it's a popular subject because you guys are waiting for me in the chat. Nice to see you all. Welcome in, Calzoon and Geocat. Hey, welcome in. I am actually featuring your artwork today, so nice that you can pop in today. Yeah, so those of you who have been to our streams before, you know that today we are going to be doing gesture drawing. And gesture is one of those topics that is really confusing. Like, I actually was very confused the first time that I learned about gestures. I was like, wait a minute, how do you draw gestures? What is a gesture to begin with? It was very, very confusing. And it took me a really, really long time to actually understand how to draw gestures. So today we're going to be diving into gesture drawing, you know, what it is, why it matters, and how you can actually use it in your work. So I'm going to walk you through all the different ways you can draw gestures first, and then we're going to jump straight into a live demo where you can see how this can be applied in real time. And I'll be also featuring some artwork from our community's monthly challenge. And as you guys know, a lot of artists get the theory, but then they get stuck when it comes to applying gesture, and that's a really, really common problem. And today we're going to help close that gap. And as you know, like I said before, when I first started drawing gestures, I had no idea what that meant. And to me, I thought this, which is the actual line work, this is a demo from one of my classes. That you can see, like, I thought that a gesture was this. I had no idea that a gesture drawing is purely supposed to be drawing the movement, right? Drawing the movement, the rhythm, the alignments. And we're here to make that a lot more clear today. So if you have any questions about gestures, let me know in the chat. If I'm going to be drawing, you know, I'll have to catch up, but rest assured, I am here to answer your questions. So if you have any questions related to gesture, put them in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer them. Welcome in, Sketch Draw. And Vin, our wonderful mod, thanks for being here. So by the end, you'll not only feel comfortable using gestures in your own art, but you'll be more confident in making clearer, more intentional choices when you start off your drawing. And by the way, if we haven't met yet, my name is Faye, one of the instructors here at Wing Canvas. I specialize in figure drawing, and so you're in the right place. We are a school of illustration and visual storytelling dedicated to helping art nerds turn their passion into income. So we love art nerds here at Wing Canvas. And if you're an art nerd too, be sure to join our Discord, where I'm going to be posting all of my demos and notes in the chat for you later on. All right. So we've got about 2 hours together. So let's get to it and make it count. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is those of you who are already familiar with the GSL method. Whoops. Sorry about that. Those of you who are already interested in gesture drawing and have seen some of the videos on the GSL method, you probably know that gesture is the G in the GSL method for figure drawing, and it stands for the most important step, but often underutilized step in drawing movement. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off and we will go into it again. So what is a gesture? Let's talk about that. So what do you think of? What is the first thing that you think of when I say gesture. What's the first thing you guys think of when I say gesture? I'm just gonna create like a little map here. Movement. Rhythm. Action. Oh, Nin XXL 871 says essence. That's a great one. The essence. The essence of a pose. Fluid and flow. Absolutely. Fluid and flow. These are all really, really good so far. Anything else you think of? These are all really, really good. One thing that's really important and underutilized is alignment. I'm going to talk about alignment in a little bit, but alignment basically means, like, if you look at this figure on the left here, right, you can kind of see that, you know, he's holding a string, but if I was to draw a curve from one hand to the other, right, that would signal alignment, right? If you look at his knees, you see how his knees align, how his feet align, right? How this hand aligns with the heel, right? Those are all alignments, and those are things that you can do in the gesture phase or the gesture stage of your drawing before you go into things like even proportions, right? So gestures are really, really important, a way of starting a pose. Here we're going to put the start of a dynamic figure drawing. It's the G in the GSL method. Anything else? Anything else when you guys think of gesture? I get asked a lot, how long should a gesture drawing take? So how long should a gesture drawing take? I would say anywhere from 30 seconds to 1 minute. Okay. So if you're a beginner, you probably want to aim for about 1 minute. If you're more experienced or you want to get into animation, I would suggest 30-second drawings. 30-second drawings can be a really good way of practicing your figures and making sure that you're not putting too much time into the gesture phase. Okay. Okay, so these are all good. When it comes to drawing gestures, there's actually different types of gestures. So we're going to go into gesture types. Okay. So when you think of, when you see a pose, you kind of want to ask yourself, what is the best way to draw a gesture? So there's 3 types of gestures that are commonly drawn, and one is a linear gesture. Okay. So a linear gesture is probably one of the most common ways people think about figure drawing. They might start with something like this, right? So if I'm drawing the pose on the left, I'm going to zoom in here. If I'm drawing a pose on the left, right, I might start off with a line, So what is the first line of action or the most obvious line that you see here? And we're just going to draw the gesture with lines. The second thing I might do is figure out, okay, where is his waist, right? So there's kind of where his underwear is, and then I'm going to draw in the other leg to anchor it. And then I might say, okay, there's the top of his head. And then where is his shoulder line? What is his shoulder line doing? What is the hip line doing, right? And then I'll draw lines to kind of break up that initial gesture. Then I might say, okay, his arm is doing this, and then his other arm is kind of coming out and doing that. And you'll notice that, like, I prefer to actually draw more fluid lines, so more S curves and slight C curves, right? Like this, rather than drawing lines like this. Like, you can draw lines that are angled, right? But typically what you want to do, let me just redraw this other leg. Typically, like, it's almost better to kind of draw the leg as a curved line or a more fluid line. Fluid lines tend to be not as accurate, right, as lines that have more of an angle. But fluid lines are actually better because they help you draw figures that have a lot more flow, right? So this is kind of what a linear gesture is. And then if I was to draw my alignments, right, I might draw like my alignment lines like this. I might align the legs, and then I might kind of draw the top of the head, and then start to draw in some of the secondary lines like that. Okay, so this is typically what a linear gesture is like, and sometimes people might draw in like the rhythm, right? So they might kind of draw in this type of rhythm, but that goes into shape, which is the next part in the GSL method. Okay, so linear gesture is probably what most people default to when it comes to drawing gestures. And then also, do I draw the head in the gesture phase? I don't. Most of the time I count the head as in the shape phase, right? But if it makes you more comfortable to draw the head, then you can draw the head. There's no like wrong or right way to draw a gesture. I mean, the way I draw is, from 20 plus years of experience, and it's the way that works for me. But if there's a way that works well for you, you don't have to change it. You can just kind of improve on what you normally do. Okay. So the second type of gesture is called a shape gesture. And shape gestures are more useful for poses like, let's find a pose where a shape gesture would be more useful. Usually when you have figures kind of standing straight, it's not as useful, but a shape gesture is really, really useful for poses like this, right? When somebody is more, they're either more compressed, they're in a pose where it's a little bit harder to draw a linear gesture, and it's easier to actually contain a gesture into a shape. So, for example, if I was to approach this gesture, right, I might kind of draw the back curved like that, and then I might just try to like fit them into a shape like this, right? So a shape gesture is more about, it's more useful if you're trying to contain the figure, right? Like if you're trying to kind of work in a contained way. So once I draw in the overall shape of the gesture, right, then what I could do is say, okay, the leg goes up to about there, and then I start to kind of break it down, right? And then the other leg kind of comes down this way, and then the feet, there's the other foot, and then the arm swings this way, right? And then there's like a little bit of a gap, going down this way, and then I might start to carve in the head, right? Just like the head shape. So shape gestures can be really useful when you're drawing people that are more compressed. Okay. And you can see, like, I'm not trying to capture the exact proportions. Like, I drew a much more curved back than he has, right? What I'm really trying to do is just sort of capture the essence of the pose in a shape rather than a linear. Question from the chat. I know how to do gesture drawing, but when I track in digitally, I feel it's too flat. There shouldn't be too much of a difference between digital and traditional. I agree with you. I have a traditional background as well, so I typically like to draw traditionally. I'm actually using a program today called Rebelle. Rebelle 8, and Rebelle 8 is a really, really good program to mimic the traditional feel without it feeling too digital, right? So part of it is maybe just like using a brush, finding the right brush. But yeah, I do agree. There's a lot of nuances that are sort of left out. Yeah, digital gestures can be a little bit can be very, very different, but you could definitely make it work. And we can go over some strategies today. So welcome in, one artist for Jesus one. Welcome in. Okay, so the third type of gesture, which is a lot of fun to do, is called a scribble gesture. Let me know in the chat if you guys have ever tried a scribble gesture before. But a scribble gesture is really useful when you're drawing a pose and you want to warm up and get really loose. So the linear gesture is meant to be like a bit more precise. So is the shape gesture. The scribble gesture is a kind of like almost like an exercise where you don't lift your pen off the paper or the tablet, right? So let's go back to the first one. So if I was to draw a scribble gesture here, what I might do is kind of like, you know, like start off with the head and then start to draw in, you know, just like really loose lines, almost like you're not really lifting your pen, but you're just trying to capture the pose in like the quickest way you can, right? Without lifting the pen off the paper. Boop. So something like that. If you haven't tried all these ways of doing a gesture, you can try these on your own. And before you go into a pose, kind of think about what is the best approach for either of these gesture types, right? So linear gesture types are good for open poses, right? Poses that are a little bit more open, whereas shape gestures are better for more contained. Contained poses, right? So like sitting, scrunching, crouching, poses that lend itself better to drawing a shape and then dividing into that instead of trying to draw like an S curve, right? So sitting, crouching, open poses that are a little bit more like standing, you know, standing, reaching, for example, right? And scribble gestures are really good for just kind of like loosening up and trying something different. Fast, they're really, really good for like fast practice. Fast loose practice. Okay. When gesturing limbs, do you draw the center line only? Outlines come later, right? That's a really good question, Kalzoon. When I'm drawing limbs, I generally think about the center line, but I'm not trying to be super precise about it because, for example, if you look at this pose over here, right? This top arm, like a lot of the times my gestures are not supposed to be super accurate. They're really just supposed to capture the rhythm. So this arm here, you know, I might end up using as the top line, and this one here I might end up using as the top line as well. So it really kind of depends on you know, which line feels right. It's not really an effort to like, okay, I'm going to draw the middle only. It's more of like, how can I capture the essence of this pose, even exaggerate it a little bit, right? Like, for example, for the legs, I can tell the legs are probably a little bit too short compared to the arms, right? And then if I was to actually finish the legs, I might kind of finish it like this. And you see a lot of the times I'll actually like deviate from the gesture. And I will change things from the gesture, right? Because the gesture is just like my initial reaction. It's my initial stab at drawing the movement. It's not meant to be super accurate. And in fact, you don't want to think, if you're trying to go for accuracy, it's better to think about placing alignments, right? So that you can have more accuracy in the drawing. You want to be more accurate in describing the movement rather than the pose, rather than like the structure or the proportions necessarily, if that makes sense. So like it's more important to draw in, you know, like the opposing rhythm of the shoulders and the opposing rhythm of the hips, for example, right? Because usually one goes this way, one goes the other way. It's more important to capture like the curve of the back than it is to capture like the middle of the rib cage, right? So it's not supposed to be super literal. You can think about it like, yes, I'm trying to draw the center line. You definitely outlines come later, but you don't want to bank on drawing super accurate lines because then you're going to be afraid. And I don't want you guys to be afraid when it comes to drawing gesture. Okay. Gesture is supposed to be super loose, you know, very, very casual, very loose. And then you really only try to think about the proportions when you're drawing the shape part of the gesture. Okay, so let me know if that makes sense so far. And to give you guys some context, because we will be drawing gestures together with some timed practice, right? But before we do that, I want to make sure I answer everybody's questions about gesture and show you guys some member artwork. So I asked our members to submit some of their gestures so that we can take a look at how other people approach gesture and how other people, like how, you know, they can improve on it as well. So let's just take a look and I'll give you my 2 cents. Keep those questions coming in the meantime. Okay, so we're gonna look at some members. So Mr. Half said, I don't know if you're here in the chat, but I know you submitted this pose and I've seen you draw this for a very long time, come up with the character designs and the color and all that. And I'm very invested in this character. But this is not a gesture. This is not a gesture. And I'm actually curious if you started off with a gesture. Because when you're making up a pose, yeah, I know the wing design's really cool. When you're actually making up a pose, it can be really challenging, right? To like figure out how all the pieces go. So usually what happens when people make up a pose, and I'm gonna kind of show you what I see very often, is, first of all, making up a pose is really hard if you're a beginner, okay? Like, unless you do the pose yourself in the mirror or get somebody to take a picture of the exact pose that you want, it's really hard to make it up. And if you ever tried to do a pose in the mirror, it's probably really stiff, right? It's probably like really cringe, really stiff. So instead, what you should do is try to find some references, or at least just try to like practice, right, how this pose would look like as a gesture. So, you know, if I was to draw this pose as a gesture, I would say, okay, well, this person's kind of got this funky pose here. He's got, you know, one foot here, another foot over there. The shoulders are going this way, so that means the hips should probably be going the opposite way. And then with the hands, right, the hands are going this way. This one's a little foreshortened. The head is tilting downwards, right? And then if you've got wings, then, you know, you can kind of like draw in the rhythm of the wings, right? You can draw in kind of like the rhythm of the wings. So this drawing is actually not a gesture, but what I tried to do is I tried to show you how I would draw a gesture, right? How I would turn this pose into a gesture. The most important thing to keep in mind is that your center line, right? A lot of people will see a pose and they'll kind of draw the center line like this, and it feels very stiff, right? So you always want to try to have some kind of movement in your center line, even when a figure is standing straight. You want to have some kind of, you know, some kind of S curve or some kind of C curve to kind of help it a little bit more. And this is kind of how I would approach the pose. And you can already see in this pose, right, that it has balance, right? You want to make sure that in your gesture stage, you have balance, you have energy or movement. And by balance, I mean that there's alignment with the legs. And then if you take a look at where the head aligns, right, the head is being supported by this leg here. You want to make sure that you know where the weight is. Okay, where is the weight? Weight distribution. You're probably not thinking about weight distribution at all. And the first time I actually thought about weight distribution was when my figure drawing teacher said, okay, everybody stand up. Stand up. And I want you to do this experiment with me, okay? So if you're sitting down, just stand up. And what I'd like you to do is just like shift your weight from one foot to the other, right? Just shift your weight. And if you shift your weight, you'll notice that when you have your weight on one foot, that your shoulders automatically tilt to balance your pose, right? You'll notice that the wider you stand and the wider your legs are, the further they are apart, the more weight has to be, like the lower you have to go on your legs. Like your legs have to be bent in order to have that weight distribution, right? So finding that center line from like the top to the bottom and figuring out where most of the weight is also really important to consider for your gesture. See you later, GeoCat. Hopefully you can come back. So let's take a look at Den's. So Den Snarver, another one of our members. This was a great, very dynamic pose that you drew, and it's pretty good. Like in terms of the gesture, you know, I can kind of see that overall, you've got this type of gesture going, right? The arms I would kind of draw in. Like a lot of the times, like if there's some weird bends in the arm, right, I'll kind of draw them like this. I'll draw one arm and then the other arm. And you can actually do this when you're studying figures, right? when you're studying figures from reference and you need to trace them, right, you can actually do this exercise where you figure out exactly what the figure is doing before you draw them. And you can see I didn't draw the S curve directly on her spine. Like a lot of people think that this S curve has to be, you know, that the rib cage has to be exactly on here and the hips have to be exactly on here and this has to go right into a leg, but it doesn't. It's really an indication of the overall energy of the pose. But yeah, like if I can trace a gesture over it, like this looks like it's pretty good. I can't actually see your gesture. So this is actually also not a gesture drawing, although it does have pretty good movement. And yeah, appreciate you submitting this and letting us use it as an example. Now let's look at, so Le Savant. Le Savant's also one of my students, and you can kind of see we have some trouble drawing standing poses because there's not really too much rhythm in a standing pose, right? So I can kind of see that you are drawing a gesture, right? Like you're kind of drawing it here and then drawing the hips and then kind of like drawing the individual legs. And then probably like figuring out what the shoulders are doing. And even though this isn't wrong, like this is technically not wrong. I suggest actually putting in that S curve and going straight down into the leg. So if you look at this figure right now, you can kind of see, like his foot is missing, but you can see that the weight is most likely on one of his legs. Can you guys identify which leg has the most weight on it? I'm not going to say left or right because it's the opposite in the picture, but A or B? Which leg, asking the chat, which leg has more of the weight on it? Let me know if you guys have a guess. Available Bread says B. Okay. The senior taco says, is it A? Napa says A. Bethany says B. Kelzun says B. Okay, it's very, very hard to tell in a standing pose. But one way that you can tell is try to find the S curve, right? There's probably some weight in A and some weight in B, but it's usually like 20-80. Okay. Very rarely do we stand with both legs at 50-50 unless you're squatting, like unless you're doing squats. Sumo wrestlers, right? They stand very wide with their both legs on the ground, evenly distributed. But most of the time it's like 80-20. Right? Most of the time it's 80-20. And you can tell if you just draw an S curve, right? If you kind of draw an S curve here, right? That S curve, the top and the bottom should align. Okay, so the top and bottom, choose a brighter color. The top and the bottom of this S curve should align. Okay. So if you are doing the, like if you're drawing a gesture and you find this S curve, most likely the leg that goes into that S curve has the weight on it, right? So if I was to, again, to draw this gesture out, I would draw the S curve. You know, you can kind of see some of that curve going into his leg, right? Can you guys see that S curve now? Right? You can see it go right into his leg. So then I would say, okay, his shoulders and his hips are pretty straight, which is kind of boring, which doesn't really have a lot of the dynamic energy that we want, right? So even if you exaggerate it just a little bit, right, you can kind of see, like, just based on the hips, right, that it's tilting a little bit up on the right hand side, like this waist, this part of his pelvis is a little bit higher than the other side. And then you can kind of see, if you drew a line with his shoulders, it's kind of tilting the opposite direction, right? Very, very subtle here, but you know, you can do this, and then the hips, you can tilt it this way. So the key is to exaggerate, right? To identify and to exaggerate, because if you don't exaggerate, then your figures are going to look kind of stiff. And the worst thing that can happen is you exaggerate and then you dial it back, right? You exaggerate and you dial it back. That's better and results in more dynamic figures than if you just kind of drew what you saw or made everything straight. Okay, so question, is alignment dependent on the body type of creature doing the gesture? Like, would a centaur have a different alignment? That's a good question. Yeah, so if I was drawing like a fantasy creature, right, kind of going back to the first one I did with Mr. Halfset. Let me just turn off a bunch of stuff here. Yeah, like for this one, right? This one has wings. If you were drawing a centaur, animals have gestures as well, right? But animals, their gestures would be kind of like you're drawing a person on all fours, right? So the spine would go, and it would still lead into the leg. Like same thing, except imagine that you're drawing a person on all fours, right? And hopefully that that helps you think about it a little bit more. But anyway, we're gonna go back to drawing humans. And then once you kind of draw in the rhythm of the hips, right, then you can kind of say, all right, if his hips are going this way, then what is his other leg doing? So his other leg is probably like, you know, kind of doing this. So you see how his other leg is straight? Right? You see how one leg has a little bit of a bend, the other leg is straighter. So usually the leg that is bent a little bit has the weight. It's really hard to stand on one leg and balance on one leg when it's straight. Like really, really hard, right? Bend it a little bit has a lot more strength. So look for a bend, a slight bend in the leg. Or in this case, you know, the leg that is directly below the head has the most balance, or has most of the weight. Okay, and then from here I would say, okay, well, here's the arm, and the arm kind of goes to about mid-thigh, right? And then the other arm is a little closer to the body, and then the head. Usually the head tilts the opposite direction, but in this case the head is kind of tilting this way. Usually speaking, the head tilts in the opposite direction of the shoulders. Not always, but sometimes. Okay, but most of the time. All right. Yeah, the Kelzu, an example of a center line on a dog or horse, we can definitely get into that when we if I have time after the time gestures. But what I can do is I can kind of show you, let's see, let's find a dog running, and I can kind of show you how to draw a gesture for that. Let's find one right now. Let's see, we got a greyhound here. Okay, just gonna pop this in here. Okay. So just like people, right? Animals also have gestures. So there's different ways that you could approach this. For this one, you know, you might want to say, okay, like the overall gesture is like this, right? He's kind of like leaping, right? And then you could say, okay, where are the arms, right? There are the arms. This one goes right into the leg. You can kind of see, like, you know, I might draw a separate line that goes into the leg. But usually my gesture leads from the spine into the leg. At least the linear gestures do that, right? And then like that's pretty much it. If you wanted to draw a little bit of like the rhythm of the rib cage, you know, you could do that. But like that's really all you need for the gesture. If you want to indicate, okay, where the ears are, right? You see how the spine, the rib cage kind of leads right into the ear. That's an alignment line, right? So it's like it's very similar when it comes to drawing people and animals, right? It's just more horizontal S curves and horizontal C curves versus vertical C curves. All right, hopefully, hopefully that helps. Okay, so let's, I have one more example here, and from one of our students, Guy. All right, so Guy, I know we've been talking a lot about gestures on the server, and you've had many questions about gestures. And I think that, again, like what you're drawing right now is actually the shape. So if you think about the GSL method, right, you are actually right now you are drawing the shapes. Hold on, let me just organize my layers here. So in terms of drawing a gesture, right, the gesture that I see for her, and sometimes it can be very, very straight, right? It's more like that. And then I would say, okay, well, her hand is kind of down here. Her other arm is kind of doing this, right? So that S curve is actually in her arms. Her hands are actually the ends of the arm gesture, right? So I always draw in the hands and the feet. Never leave those out, because if you leave those out, then it's really hard to figure them out later, right? You can say, okay, her rib cage is curving this way, and then over here, her pelvis is curving that way. This leg is not super accurate, but I could draw an alignment line and say, okay, her foot is there, right? And then her other leg comes down and is going this way, right? So this would be an example of a linear gesture. And then what I would do is I would draw in her hair, right? Her hair is a ball. And then like her face. And the reason why I draw in the hair is because it's such an obvious shape that I feel like it can get a really, I can even like work on the likeness before I even move on to the shape phase, right? So right now I can see what you could probably improve on is like drawing your lines of alignment, right? Like the arm is a little too long because we don't have that alignment. The second one is a little bit better. But I want you guys to kind of stay away from drawing arms like this, right? If you're in my classes, I'm always like, don't draw arms like that. Draw them as cylinders. But that's a lesson for a different stream. Today we're focusing just on gestures. Hey, Guy, nice to see you. Artist in chat. So really good job with keeping up with the figure drawing practice. I definitely see huge amounts of improvement. I just want to clarify though that gestures do not mean the middle. So I can kind of see like you're drawing the middle line, which is great. But the overall gesture does not have to be exactly in the middle. It's more of an interpretation. So for example, if you could only describe the pose with one line, right? If you could only describe the pose with one line, what would that be, right? Probably a scribble gesture. But if you could only describe the pose with one line, what would it be? Versus like if you had to draw the middle of the person, where would that line be, right? So you don't want to like think of gestures as like the midline. I think that was the biggest lesson that I learned when I started drawing gestures, because I would think literally, I think, okay, I see this guy and I think that the gesture has to be like It has to like be exactly in the middle, right? I think, okay, if I'm drawing a gesture, I need to make sure that my line is exactly in the middle, which is kind of what you're doing here. Like you're drawing this line, then you're drawing this line, and then you're kind of like drawing in the legs, right? So even though this has good rhythm, it's technically not a gesture. It's more you're kind of like drawing in the opposing curves or the rhythm. So technically, you know, if I was drawing this guy who's very foreshortened, right? I would also look for the S curve here, and I can see that sometimes the S curve isn't super obvious, right? But I'll do my best to like draw in that compression. So here's where the knees align. There's the foot, right? There's the front of the foot, and then if you want to kind of draw in, you know, these lines, like the lines of rhythm that you're doing, you can. Some people do that in their gesture phase. And then for the, you know, for the hands, it depends on how much detail you want to go into it. But like the hands here, I can kind of see the hands have a lot of real estate. Like they're pretty big, right? Because it's foreshortened. And then this hand would kind of come out and just point downwards, right? So here I kind of connect. I saw a C curve, and it ended on his leg from behind. And then I just kind of drew, I felt like it was easier to kind of draw this curve rather than to draw like a wiggly curve. And I like, if you see a gesture and it's kind of like this, right? Or it's more than an S curve, it's like that, it gets less and less accurate. Okay, so try not to draw gestures that are like wiggly lines. Just try to stick to like C curves and S curves. Okay, if it gets too wiggly, then it starts to feel a little bit off. Yeah, no worries, Guy. The recording will be here. Glad you're able to join. Okay. Don't know terminology, but I describe it as me when I throw onions. It's cool. A lot of these like the terminology that I'm using in terms of like linear gestures, shape gestures, and scribble gestures, those are not like those are not a lot of those are just terms that I use personally. They're not I'm not sure if they're, you know, like formal terms or anything like that. So you can call it whatever you want. Maxco22, my understanding of gesture is that of a beginner. Hardly did it before and never knew how to tackle 30-second gesture drawing sessions. No worries. We're going to do that very, very shortly. I just want to kind of explain how to approach gesture and just kind of show you what some of our students are doing, right? Just to kind of help you guys understand it better. Because personally, gestures took me a really, really long time to figure out, because nobody showed me. When I was in school, nobody showed me. I had to figure it out, and I had to figure it out by watching people that I really admired draw gestures and piece it all together. Okay, so if you are drawing, let me just make this a little wider for now. Okay, so if you're drawing somebody who is holding a weapon, that weapon becomes very important to the story, right? So with this gesture, you can tell, like, would you draw an S curve or would you draw a C curve? Let me know, guys, if you would draw an S curve or a C curve. S or C curve. Could you please tell me how I properly draw a goblin creature, a goblin gesture? Start with humans and then alter the proportion. If you guys want to draw anything really well, animals, fantasy creatures, you know, goblins, elves, dwarves, whatever it is, start with humans and then alter the proportions. Always study with humans. because that's how you get better at everything. Okay, everybody's saying C. Napa says C. Celtic Manga says C curve. Elise says C. Weepin' Willow says S. Available Bread says C. Bethany says S. All right, cool. So in this case, where would you say his weight is? Is it in foot A or is it in foot B? Where is his weight? Where's the weight? A or B? Kelsoon says S. Okay, Available Bread says S. Oh, Les Savon, welcome in. Lovely student of ours. A. Okay. B has weight. A is support. Okay. So why don't we do this? Try to recreate this pose. Okay, so if you're not sure, stand up. Pretend you are stepping forward and swinging an axe. Or maybe not even stepping forward, but let's like pretend you're swinging an axe, okay? And you got 1 foot in front and 1 foot behind. I'm doing it too with you guys. Okay, so you'll see that the weight is actually transferred from 1 foot to the other. So when you swing, right, before you swing, the weight is on A. After you swing, the weight is on B. Same thing if you are shooting a hockey puck, right? Or swinging a golf club. You are transferring your weight from 1 foot to the other. So technically, you guys are both right. The weight starts on A and gets transferred to B. In this pose, it looks like he's standing and posing for a photographer. So it's not like a super action-y pose, right? But yes, generally, I would draw this as a C curve to get that action across. And then you could, like, if you drew it as an S curve, you're not wrong. It just depends on, you know, where he is in that swing, right? So, you see how I always draw, like, the gesture of the feet, right? I always draw the gesture of the feet. And I notice that a lot of people will not draw the gesture of the feet. And I'm like, well, if you don't draw the gesture of the feet, you're not going to know, you're not going to know how to set yourself up later. So you always want to do that. And then there's the axe, right? And then the head is kind of going this way. And then depending on, you know, where that weight is, right? You can say, like, for example, if you look at his head, right? His head is like even more forward, swinging even more forward. So maybe his head is going to be like, let's see here. Let me redraw this axe. And say, okay, so he's gonna come back. The hands are gonna be here, and then the axe is gonna be here, and then his head is actually gonna be here. It's gonna be more forward, right? So I think that it's really important to consider the weight and the alignment. So it's not really about accuracy at this point. It's really more about movement and alignment. So now I can see that I might need to move his foot in a little bit more, but that's kind of how I would approach it. Yeah, it's almost evenly distributed, but it transfers, right? So if I wanted to make this pose have a little bit more action, I would probably put this leg on his tippy toes, right? Like if this foot was lifted, right, and this foot was steady, then you would be able to see that weight transfer even more. So again, try to avoid just drawing the torso and then drawing the legs very literally like this, right? This is kind of how you might construct a robot. So you're thinking this is structure. Like this right here is structure. It's not gesture. So don't confuse structure with gesture. Okay, structure is important, but really gesture is here, right? The right arm has weight in the arms, though that's caused the power arm in the stance. The left hand is support as it's controlling the swing. Yeah, exactly. I think the weight distribution is more important on legs rather than arms. Unless somebody's standing on their arms, right? If they're standing on their arms, then it's different. If they're doing like a headstand, then it's a little bit different. Okay. And then, you know, when you're drawing really, really stiff poses like this, and you want to put a little bit of gesture, this one is kind of an anomaly because they're not actually standing. They're kind of jumping, and they're jumping straight up and down. So in this case, you know, if you wanted to give her a little bit of gesture, if you want to find that S curve, it's a lot harder. So in this case, I would probably just draw her you know, more of just like a slight C curve like this, right? And then kind of like figure out, okay, what is her foot doing? What's her other foot doing? And then like draw in her arms. And I typically will draw in the arms as one line versus like joint, 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 joint. I would just draw it in as one curve. Like, if you want, you can draw two curves and connect them if that's easier. And then it's more helpful to kind of draw in the alignments, right? Like make sure that the hands align, make sure that the elbows align, right? And then, you know, wherever the here the foot is aligning with the knee, right? The top of the knee. That to me is a bit more helpful. Okay. Isn't it the same, but when doing background art, just setting the floor lower or putting a line for reference where the floor is? I don't know if you're referring to like the alignment of the foot specifically, but background art is something totally different. And so we're talking about gesture here, so I'm not quite sure what the the fact that she's mid jump. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I might add here when you're drawing your gesture is like a shadow, right? Because if I see that the shadow is not touching her foot, right, then I know that she's jumping, right? So sometimes you can draw a bit of a shadow there if that helps. All right, so you guys ready for timed poses? Before we go into that, I want to show you guys that we have a challenge this month, and today's only the 2nd of February, so you got the whole month to submit your anatomy in motion drawings for this month's art challenge, and we'll feature you in the stream. So you could get featured and get a shout out. So all you need to do is join the Discord to submit your artwork for the monthly challenge. We have one every month, and our streams are actually designed to help you do these challenges as well. So if you're drawing along with me today, you can submit those to be featured in our February stream. All right, so submission number 1 is by GeoCat. I know GeoCat had to go, but GeoCat was saying that she was drawing figure skaters for figure drawing. So this is Yuzuru Hanyu, a Japanese figure skater. And I actually completely agree. Figure skaters are really, really, really great for figure drawing because you could just, not only is figure skating beautiful to watch, you can just pause it, right? And everything is very fluid. So just pause it, watch a video on YouTube, pause it, do a drawing, unpause it, do a drawing. All of the poses will be very fluid and natural instead of posy. right? Because a lot of the times we'll draw from references where models are posing rather than mid-action. So thanks for submitting these, GeoCat. Hopefully you can do more of these after watching the stream. All right, second submission, Zipporah. Zipporah, these are so awesome. These are so cool. I know you submitted your references too, but it's really cool to see how you can stylize your figures by basing them off of just, you know, Pinterest references. Love seeing the foreshortening, love seeing you really like stylizing the characters. So really well done. Thank you for submitting. And our Deli Bean. Our Deli Bean. I'm not sure if this is the first time you've submitted to this challenge, but I haven't seen you before, and I think that this is a really cool character and definitely got nice movement going on in the body, really beautiful rhythm in the tail. If you're drawing tails on characters, I definitely suggest drawing a line right to the pelvic bone. Right now the tail looks like it's a little bit high, but overall, like, I think you have really good movement in this piece. So thank you so much for submitting. Love seeing all of your different interpretations of the theme. Alrighty. If you guys aren't ready for some timed poses, we can get into it. So let's see. Yeah, if you want to be part of our monthly challenge, you can join the Discord, and we will we'll definitely look at all the submissions, and we'll definitely give you a shout out if we can. Okay, so let's get into gesture drawing, and let me know if you guys have any questions before we get started. Okay. All right. So if you're drawing digitally like me, I really like using pastel brushes. So I'm using a program called Rebelle 8, and I've played around with a lot of the brushes. And the one that I like the most is actually the pastel brush. I can kind of like build up. It's really, really good for shading. I can kind of build up my my values, right? And then I can like quickly make it small or make it large to kind of like fill stuff in, right? So I really like this pastel brush. If you haven't heard of Rebelle, it's a really cool software that allows you to draw like traditional art, but digitally. And it's got all kinds of cool papers as well. All right. Okay, so we're going to start off with some 1-minute poses. These are actually from a site called Line of Action. And Line of Action is one of the sites that I use for timed poses. It's free and it's pretty good. It's just I've drawn so many of these poses that they keep repeating now. But you can actually set how much time you want them to be, and you can also select the gender and the age of the people that you want to draw. Okay, so we're going to start off with 1-minute gestures. And if you've never done gestures before, you're welcome just to watch, jump in anytime. And we're going to do a set of 10, and then after that, I will answer any questions that you may have. Okay. All right. Yeah, if you want to check out Rebelle, Nightbot just dropped a link, and it's our affiliate link for Rebelle, so it doesn't cost you anything, but it helps support the channel. All right, cool. You guys ready? All right, we're gonna start.
So you might see me draw with different types of, like different types of gestures. So I'm going to switch between linear and shape and scribble just to kind of show you kind of how I like to draw. In the gesture phase, it's actually really just like really quick. If somebody's facing up, I kind of try to draw like the bottom of their chin. And then I always kind of try to draw a bit of the story. So really, there's not really too much thinking. It's just a lot more intuitive. Like the process should be very intuitive. And, if you watch different artists do it, they'll do it differently. But typically, again, it's not about accuracy. It's more about capturing the movement. This one's kind of funny. He's got like an element of surprise, one leg's lifting, and then that broomstick, right? That broomstick is part of the overall gesture and kind of part of the support. So far, all of these are linear gestures. So we're gonna do this. Okay, so this one is fairly flat. So with this one, this one is like not the best for movement, but if you wanted to, you can, try to put some more rhythm in his body here. You can see again, I'm putting most of the weight or most of the that S curve into one of the legs.
So I actually finished the gesture, and then I'm like drawing shapes, right? Like if you have extra time, then you can start to put other details in that can help you. But yeah, typically the gesture doesn't go into shapes. Okay, so we did this one before. This one is more of a shape gesture, right? I can kind of see some questions coming in, and I'll answer them once we're done with these. Here I kind of put in the head, right? Because when you're drawing a shape-based gesture, you kind of have to then figure out what is in each shape, right? Like once you draw in the shape, you're like, okay, I have the shape down. Now I got to figure out like how to divide the shape up, right? How do I then figure out, you know, where everything goes? And you definitely want to draw through the form. You don't want to just draw what you see in front. I'm gonna skip this one because it's also not very dynamic. We'll do this one. Let's see how many we've done already. 7. Okay, so 3 more. This pose is also, it can work as a shape gesture as well because it's kind of more compressed and it's got like all this cloth on it, right? So you can try linear, and if it doesn't work, you can always combine it. Linear gestures are probably like the most common, right? Like if you're drawing somebody wearing bulky clothing like this, the cloth also has a gesture of its own, right? So it can be helpful to draw in that cloth so that you know what's part of the fabric and what's part of the actual pose. All right, last one, and we're at 10. Okay, so I'm gonna catch up with the chat here. Whew. All right, so hopefully that was not too stressful and good practice. So you can see in 10 minutes we were able to draw 10 poses, and you know, not all of them are perfect, but you can at least tell the movement, right? and the energy. And that's really the goal, is just to make sure that you can draw the energy and the movement, and not worry too much about structure later on. So I'm going to answer some questions. When line gesturing, Kelzoon, is there an order on which limbs to draw first? Okay. When line gesturing, is there an order to which limbs to draw first, or is it just whichever feature is more interesting? That's a really good question. I would say that I generally draw the legs first because I work big to small, right? So you generally want to work big, to, oh, let me make this smaller. You want to work big to small because it's more efficient that way, right? It's like, think of it this way. If you're building a house, right? You're gonna build the foundation first. You're not gonna, like, you know, paint it or put the details on first, right? A lot of people will, like, worry about details and they won't work big to small. So as a general rule, you want to work big to small. Okay. You want to, like, look for the S or C curve. Generally, you want to look for the S and C or C curve and do that first. And then hopefully one of the curves will lead into the leg, and then you can draw the other one, right? That's kind of like my process for a lot of them. Hello, water flow. I can't do 1 minute poses yet, always 2 minutes. That's okay. If you need 2 minutes, then do 2 minutes. The 1 minute is really only to get in your gesture. And here I've been able to do gesture and shape a little bit. So it's more about like flow, but it's not really, you know, you work at your own pace, whatever is the most comfortable for you. Yeah, if you go right into boxes, that's not good. You're missing out on all the flow and all the rhythm, right? All the beauty of the energy. So spend like 30 seconds just to kind of capture those curves. And then go into the nitty gritty. Hey, welcome in, Arunya. Love the flow. Great, quick practice. Thanks so much. Good morning, Nerd Does Art. I'm a nerd doing art too. Welcome in. Waterflow says, what do you do when you notice that your base structure is not solid, but you already finished coloring your piece? So if your base structure is not solid, it's probably a, if it doesn't feel solid, it's not really a gesture problem. It's more of a shape/form problem. But if you finish coloring and drawing your pose and then you're like, oh no, it's actually, it doesn't have any of the action. It feels super stiff, right? That's a gesture problem. But generally what I would do is I would redraw the gesture, right? And redraw the pose. And if you can color it once, then you already know the colors that you need to use, right? You did the hard work and you just do it again. All right. Okay, so we did 1 minute gestures. Now let's do some 2 minute drawings where we're gonna build on to the gesture. Okay. So some quick guidelines. Work big to small. Look for the S and C curve. You know, think about gesture types. So you want to think about balance. You know, like making sure that the top of the head is aligned with the leg somehow, right? Like it's kind of aligned here it's aligned. This one is seated, so it doesn't really matter, but you want to think about balance and alignments. And when you draw gestures, use curvy or wavy lines. So use curves
avoid, you know, straight. Avoid straight lines that feel stiff, right? You want to try and draw curves as much as possible. The only part you would draw straight lines with are like, you know, maybe the bottom of the feet, or maybe you're drawing a weapon and that weapon is straight, right? Or you're drawing somebody holding something. So you want to try and use curves as much as possible. All right. So with 1 minute, you know, you're really only able to do so much. But with 2 minutes, we're able to do more. So I'm going to talk about my favorite drawing exercise is actually 2-minute poses, not 1 minute. But let's do some 2-minute poses. Okay, so when I say gestures that are 2 minutes, I'm actually not just talking about gesture. I'm talking about gestures and shapes. So for those of you who just joined in, I'm going to show you a demo here that kind of outlines the GSL method for figure drawing that I like to teach in my classes. So we are focusing on the G. Okay, we're focusing on the gesture. So the gesture is really like the first step. And in the gesture phase, you're really just drawing in the action, you're mapping out the alignment. Sometimes it doesn't even look like a figure, right? Like if I didn't draw the heads in here, you probably wouldn't even see the figure. And something to note is if you're drawing two people interacting, you definitely want to draw the gesture, and you want to draw the gesture as kind of like together, right? You're not drawing them separately, you're drawing them together because they're interacting together, they're moving together. The rhythm is together, so you can kind of see I drew them together. When we get to 2 minutes, we're actually starting to draw the shapes. And so as soon as you start drawing out the head and the torso and the legs, right, you're moving into shape territory. So the 2-minute gestures is where we venture into shapes, and we're going to focus more on silhouette. Okay, we're not going to do any line drawing today because you guys all know how to do the details. You guys all all like the line drawing or do the line drawing first. We want to focus on the gesture and the shape first. Okay, so let's now move into, let's do 2 minutes. Nerd Does Art says, I've been having a bit of trouble finding my art styles. Do I have any tips for that? We do. We actually have, we're working on some videos, and we actually have some videos in the channel, on the channel, and we talk about it all the time in our classes. That is going to be a topic for a different stream, but we definitely have some videos that can help. Art style takes a long time, and it's something that's kind of like natural, right? So you just kind of have to just focus on your fundamentals, look at people that you really admire, and things will fall into place. And you don't have to have one art style. Art styles can evolve, and they should evolve with time. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change this now. I'm gonna change this to, let's see, we're gonna do figure drawing. We're gonna do all covered models, all genders. We're gonna do, we won't draw babies today. Now we're gonna do 2 minutes. Okay, ready guys? And I'm gonna skip the less dynamic ones. Let's go to like the dynamic ones. Okay, so when you're drawing 2-minute gestures, right, don't slow down. Like, don't slow down on the gestures. Keep the pace of the gestures if you can, right? But now now there's time to go into shapes. So what I tend to do is like I will draw in the silhouette, and I'll just like draw with a solid brush, and I'll just go like right into the shapes of the drawing of the figure. So I focus more on the silhouette. Right, so even though you can't see the arm, it's behind. So you just want to always draw through the form if you can. So you can see it's like very rough, right? I'm just really trying to figure out the shapes. And then like adjust as I go. So I'm gonna adjust the width of the arms, right? And then like draw in some of the cloth. Let's get some non-stiff poses, yeah? We can skip some. Okay, so for this one is very, very much almost like an X shape, right? And you can see like that curve goes from the arm into the leg. It has really nothing to do with the curve of the spine. And I love 2 minutes because it gives me the time to focus on the shapes and gives me the time to focus on drawing the silhouette, which is really important. So if you just joined us, we are doing 2-minute timed practice. Okay, so this one I'm gonna keep, it's not as dynamic as I'd like, but this is like the sumo wrestler pose, right? Where it's like there's lots of weight that's kind of evenly distributed on both legs. So it's kind of more like this, right? And then where are the hands? The hands are kind of like mid-knee, right? They're like this and kind of coming out this way. So this one, since it's so symmetrical and so compressed, I'm not going to draw a silhouette. I'm just going to kind of focus on mapping out the shapes that I see in a little bit more detail. Then I can always fill it in later. And just a tip, I find that drawing heads last can be really helpful for proportions, because a lot of people, they'll start by drawing the head, and then usually, like most of the time, the head is too big, and then it kind of like messes up the proportions. So if you just draw the head last, it can really help. You know, you can decide how big you want the head at the very end versus the beginning. Okay, so really that's the gesture. Right? That's the gesture. It should take about 30 seconds. Also, if you're working digitally, use bigger brushes. I'm gonna skip that one. These are all not dynamic enough for me. Okay, this one's pretty good. Okay, so there's the gesture. It's important not to confuse the gesture with like the shape phase, right? Because like you can see, sometimes gestures can be a little bit off in terms of the pose, because they're meant to be more exaggerated, right? So they're not always exactly they're not meant to be super accurate per se. And if you have too much pressure when you're drawing the gesture, like you feel like it has to be perfect and it has to be accurate, then you're kind of less likely to do a good job. Like you can see how off I was here with the shoulder, right? Like that was not that was not accurate at all. So I really like silhouettes because then I'm just focusing on the shape, right? I'm not really putting too much energy into like drawing the structure yet. But sometimes, like with this pose, because there's so much in front and so much behind, I find that it's probably more helpful to draw the structure or more of the details. Right? I just don't want to have any confusion because it's hard to see those overlapping shapes. This guy's head is gonna run into... Whoopsies. I just paused him because I need to make him smaller. Okay. So I'm running out of space. This guy's head is kind of a very strange angle. All right. So 2 minutes. Let's catch up with the chat here. Ooh, all right. I've been having issues with hair. This is inside a tin can. I've been having issues with hair. I've always been able to study things pretty well, but hair is always an issue for me. Anyone got any tips? Yeah, Google winged canvas hair. We have lots of tutorials on the channel. Or you can try our school. You can join our school for 7 days for free, and we have some lessons, some of my lessons actually on drawing hair. But hair also has gesture, and hair also has shapes. So if you just kind of like, you can use the GSL method for almost anything. For hair, it's mostly focusing on shapes rather than lines. So as soon as you go into line territory, it's over with hair, or it's like the detail, right? So yeah, we got lots of tutorials on hair on the channel and classes that you can try out for free. Just go to school.com/wingedcanvas. You can try that out. I just got here. What kind of image is this? We are drawing gestures. Okay, you need to practice making different hair texture like curly hair. Yep, practice makes perfect. How do I make proportions in the style that I draw? You want to focus on silhouettes. Like the 2-minute practice is always the best way to do it. Are there any books you read to get really good at anatomy? Yeah, there are. Specifically off the top of my head, what was the one book that I used a lot? I was actually asked to create a figure drawing book and to publish one, but I just didn't have the time, so I had to turn it down. But Michael Hampton has a book called Figure Drawing Design and Invention, and I found that one to be really helpful. I have a copy of it and I consult it a lot, so that's a good one. How often or not should an eraser be used in gesture? That's a really good question. Try not to use an eraser. As soon as you have eraser mentality, you're like, oh, okay, I can go back on it. The only time I use an eraser is if I need to move, if I'm like past the gesture phase and I need to like draw the shape phase and I realize that it's off, that's when I will erase the gesture. So don't like you only have 30 seconds, right? You don't have enough time to do a lot of erasing. Yeah, no erasing if possible. If you're drawing traditionally, you can use vine charcoal, because vine charcoal is super, super helpful, because you can just like erase it by running your hand across it, and then it's erased. So vine charcoal is great. Yeah, so okay, so we did 1 minute gestures, we did some 2 minute silhouettes. I think what we're gonna do now is I will draw a longer pose, and I'll kind of show you how to turn these gestures into a drawing, into like a finished drawing. So let me try to find one. I believe somebody asked about figures with crossed legs, and I want to be able to show you how to do that. So why don't we do this one? We'll do this one because this one is kind of confusing, right? So this person is a little bit larger, right? So you can't see a lot of the landmarks like you would see on somebody who is like really skinny or really muscular. And also this is a male with like a ponytail, right? So it's a little bit hard to also distinguish the gender. So when you get an ambiguous, like a more kind of like subject who is not your typical figure drawing subject, someone who's like lean and muscular and all that stuff, this is when it becomes a little bit more challenging. So let's do this one. I really like this model though. He's got some very nice poses. So let's do a longer pose, and we're going to use the GSL method. If you haven't, if this is your first stream with us or you haven't really watched any of our videos, I like to use the GSL method for figure drawing, and I'm just going to go over some of the basics with you guys. Okay, so each of these represents a different phase, right? So today we are talking about the gesture phase. So the gesture phase is where you think about movement. So it's all about movement. It's all about rhythm and alignment. And it's about the essence, right? Not accuracy. Accuracy in structure. Okay, you get the accuracy in the alignment, but your goal is not to like make it super, super accurate in terms of structure. Okay, so I'll explain what that means in a little bit. So for example, for this one, the gesture of the back is very curved, right? Now you can kind of draw that and think, oh, that's way too curved, right? That's like way too curved. This looks a little bit more like the curve of his back. So in some cases, like you do need a little bit of accuracy. At least you want to make that, you know, pose look like the curve actually like look like the person. But for the most part, you don't really need to worry too much about the proportions at this stage. The proportions, by proportions, I just mean like, you know, don't worry so much about the nitty-gritty stuff, right? Or the structure and all that. Just kind of think about the overall gesture. Okay, so there's some compression going on here. Right, and then what's his other leg doing? His other foot is kind of doing this, and his hand is doing this. For context, there's like a little stool that he's sitting on, right? But you can see, like, right now, there's really not a lot. Like, this doesn't even look like a human. If I asked you what this is, you'd be like, maybe it's a person. So if you're a beginner, what I would say is, like, don't try to draw the entire body all at once with lines. You want to break it down so that it's easier for you to draw things each stage at a time, right? If you don't draw the gesture, then you're really missing out on a lot of the movement, right? So that didn't take it very long. Gestures should take roughly 30 seconds, okay? 30 seconds to a minute. And if you're a beginner, give yourself some more time. It's cool. So for shapes, this is where we're looking for proportions. Shape is when we're looking at proportions and when we're thinking about structure. Okay. So here, when I'm kind of, once I've sort of figure out what my gesture is doing, then I can start to draw in the shape. And I'm going to do this on a separate layer. So first, when you're drawing heads, you can kind of think about, okay, what makes this head unique? Like what makes this head shape unique? This person's got a sort of a square-ish head, right? And I want to play that up. Then I'm looking at the curve of the back and sort of like, you don't really have to know exactly what the rib cage is doing in here, because he's got more meat on him, right? So it's really hard to see exactly where things are, but you can kind of see where the shoulders are, right? The shoulder is kind of here where the deltoid is, and you can see that my original placement for the shoulder is a little bit off. And then I can start to draw in the cylinders of the arm, right? And then draw in the cylinders. And then the shape of the hand. Right. The shape that you see underneath his arm is actually a cast shadow of his arm onto his torso. And it's up to you whether you want to draw the shadows or not, but like for now I'm just going to draw the compression. Right here I'm drawing the compression of his torso, and here is the elongated part of the torso. Then I'm going to draw in his leg. So his leg is going to overlap the elbow a little bit, right? And I can start to draw in the form of the leg. You can see that it kind of attaches there, but his shorts are showing down at the bottom. So this is where I start to divide everything out into shapes. Because his other leg is super compressed, what you can do is you can kind of start to draw in, like I draw a cylinder like this, and then a small cylinder like that to kind of draw in the compression, versus if it's not compressed, it would be more like that, right? So this is foreshortened. So it might be something like this. And then If you're drawing somebody wearing a skirt or something and you can't really see what's going on, I highly encourage you to not just say, okay, I'm just gonna draw a dress and hope nobody notices anything, and I'm just gonna be lazy and not actually figure out what's going on underneath. Don't do that, because then you're never gonna really know how to make poses up, right? So always just like try to figure out the shapes or the forms as best as you can. And when I'm drawing legs, I always draw cylinders for limbs. And the reason why it's much better to draw arms and legs as cylinders where you see the tops and the bottoms, rather than drawing arms and legs like this where you have no idea where the tops and the bottoms are. Like if I drew an arm like this, okay, this is A and this is B, it's completely flat. Whereas if I drew the top of A, right, and then I drew the top of B and I draw them separately, right? Hold on. So there's the bottom, there's the top, there's the bottom. Can you see how they're going in completely different directions, right? The silhouette can be exactly the same, but if you don't draw the tops and the bottoms of the cylinders, then you have no idea which direction they're going in. And A and B are going in opposite directions. B, right, the hand is coming towards you. A, the hand is going away from you, right? But you would never know if you just drew them as flat shapes. So this is kind of the shape and the gesture is the hardest part. The line is not that hard. I mean, some of you do tell me that it's like line art on its own is kind of hard, you know, but that's just practice, finding the right brush, you know, kind of figuring out, getting into a good rhythm of things, and practice, right? I'm not gonna go too deeply into line because I know you guys are all much more familiar with line than the gesture and the shape phase. Okay. NYIT 6812. I've been in a slump for so long I even considered giving up on drawing. Oh no! I randomly got recommended this stream and I'm so glad because I actually practiced for the first time and I don't know how long. Thank you. You are welcome. I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, I mean, being in a slump is okay and it's totally normal. Don't beat yourself up for it. Sometimes it can be really hard, you know, to do something fun like drawing when you've got so much stuff going on with life. But you always want to give yourself that time, right? That time to get back into it. And I'm really glad. You should join our community. !Discord. Join our community and you can get a lot of accountability by just, you know, sharing your artwork and chatting with other art nerds. And I'm going to be posting my demo as well as my notes from the stream in the Discord. So those of you guys who are wondering, where is the rib cage, right? Faye didn't draw the rib cage, and it's true. I didn't draw the rib cage here because I don't think it's necessary. I can draw the rib cage, like if I wanted to, you know, draw this pose, like there's the rib cage. The hips are actually kind of, you know, doing this, and then the arm is doing this, and then the leg is attached this way. Right? Sometimes it's really, the rib cage is very obvious, but other times when it's not obvious, it's better to just kind of draw it as a flat shape, right? It makes it easier for you, and it's like sometimes it's okay if you don't draw it in. You just want to like make sure that you have it in the back of your head, right? Where that all goes. And then if you wanted to finish this off, right, then you can draw the lines on top, right? And then it becomes so easy to draw the lines on top. Once you get to the line phase, it should be super easy to do because you've already figured out the shape, you've already figured out the gesture, you have the movement, you have the structure. Now line is where you can just draw the details, and you want to make sure that you don't have to draw every line, right? You want to draw lines that indicate overlap, and you can have a lot more fun because you've already kind of figured it out. You've already done the hard work. So with the line phase, I'm actually going to do a bit of shading. I know it's not technically line, but it's detail, and I think you can get like a lot of the anatomy and those like really nice details in the forms by then putting in some of the values, right? So I can shade it. And the best way to draw a line is to draw, I mean, if you're a cartoonist, you might disagree with me, and it's okay. But I always think less is more. So if you can get away with drawing less lines, it's always better, right? You want to avoid hairy lines. Do you guys know what I mean when I say hairy lines? Lines that don't seem confident, lines that are very shaky, lines that look hairy instead of lines that look confident. So if you catch yourself drawing hairy lines, you probably did not do the GSL method. Because if you did, then you would have had 3 chances to figure out all the hard stuff, like your proportions and your structure, and you won't actually need all of those hairy lines and all of those like, I'm really scared, so I think I'm just gonna draw a bunch of short little lines and hope that they hope that they're in the right place, instead of confidently drawing lines because they're in the right place because you've mapped them out, you've done all the hard work. Also known as chicken scratch. Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm talking about. We've all done those, right? We've all drawn hairy lines before, and they never turn out so good. So yeah, you can see like you can just kind of like do direct shading without any lines on top, and it starts to look pretty good, right? Once everything is in place, you can kind of, you can really get away with a lot of stuff by just working in this way, working with the GSL method, doing one thing at a time instead of trying to do everything all at once. So I'm just showing you shading because I feel like the line is like I've already kind of done some of it. But if I really did want to then draw the lines, right, I would then just emphasize the stuff that has overlap. I would work on the hard and soft edges. And then, you really don't need much. Like, I think being selective about where you put your lines is a lot better than just like those hairy lines, right? So no more hairy lines, guys.
So lots of appreciation and gratitude for our audience. You guys asked really good questions. And I hope that doing this exercise together can really show you how much easier it is when you just break stuff down into different phases rather than trying to do everything all at once. Is there a tip to moving away from the hairy line habit? Yes, the GSL method. If you find yourself drawing hairy lines, it's probably because you haven't figured out the movement, the structure, the shapes. So figure that stuff out first, right? And then lines will be a piece of cake. It'll be very, very easy. Because the reason why lines are hard is because like you're trying to do so much all at once. You're trying to figure out the proportions, you're trying to figure out the pose, you're trying to, make sure you capture the anatomy. Like there's just like so much going on. Whereas if you just focus on one thing at a time, it's a lot easier, and you have many chances, right, to get those right before you focus on the line. And when you're focusing on the line, you're doing line art in the best possible way rather than like chicken scratch or not feeling confident. If you haven't heard of GSL before today, we have tons of tutorials on the channel, and if it's actually a method that I coined. So GSL is I invented it. It's not like something that's existing or like some kind of well-known terminology. I invented the GSL method because it was a way of wrapping my head around a method of drawing that is a little easier because you work on one thing at a time. All right. Yeah, and draw with your whole arm from your shoulder instead of your wrist. Yeah, that's a really good tip. Drawing with your wrist can tend to have shaky lines, but you need to draw bigger if you want to just draw with your arm instead of your wrist. All right. Hi, Moonlight. You came at the end of the stream, but welcome in. I hope that today was insightful. If you just joined us, then we will be posting the VOD afterwards so that you can take a look on your own time. And yeah, I, again, really, really appreciate everybody's input. And if you want to get feedback, community feedback on your artwork, you can join our Discord. And if you're still hanging out with us at the end, the next step is to grab the free goodies that we like to put out each week on our Discord. So join the Discord, make sure you grab the opportunities role so that you can take advantage of all the free resources that we drop in our community. And let's see, up next, I'm supposed to tell you guys next week. Next week, what's going on? Let me just get that for you. So next week, we are doing motion studies from video references. So next Monday, Josh is going to be showing you how to do motion studies from video references. And this Saturday, February 7th, Jessie is going to show you how to draw breasts and butts. Yes, my friends. We are doing it. Breasts and butts, full-on anatomy. How you draw them is coming up this Saturday, so don't miss it. And on Saturday, February 14th, on Valentine's Day, we are doing our 12-year anniversary stream. So don't miss that as well. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I had a great time. And I will see you on the Discord. All right. Bye-bye.